Hey guys, welcome back. I want to give a quick roundup on the latest developments of Bitcoin, which is interesting. Also, quick mention on what we could expect to see from the actual Bitcoin conference, which we held in Nashville later on this week. And also, I'd like to make a last mention on why we should be continuing to dollar cost average into Bitcoin as a result. So let's start off with this Bitcoin Nashville conference. It's going to be held between the 25th and 27th of July later this week, and you've got some prominent guest speakers. The number one being the presidential candidate Donald Trump, followed by independent presidential candidate RF Kennedy Jr. You've got Kathy Woods from ARK Investments, and of course, you can't ever exclude Michael Saylor. Infamous Michael Saylor will be giving his spiel as well. So it's an interesting lineup. But I think what's really new and interesting is the Trump making a speech, because as you know, he's in the lead into becoming re-elected as the US president later on in November. And as you know, we've been hearing that he's an adamant pro-Bitcoiner. So he's done a quick 180 U-turn, because we started out as being a skeptic and a doubter of Bitcoin. Now he's suddenly a pro-Bitcoiner. He's making a lot of mention and noise about, I'm going to be setting up US mining capabilities for Bitcoin in the United States, making America great again. And one other thing that there's a lot of rumors speculating about, which is interesting, is the notion of having a US strategic reserve for Bitcoin. Now, this is actually important, because if he makes this statement, which there is high odds of him making a mention about it in the conference, well, this is going to really set the bull running for Bitcoin even further. Not to say there aren't any triggers already set up. What would this mean? Let's put it into practical terms. Well, it means incorporating Bitcoin into the US National Treasury Reserve holding, which could be an answer to help diversify the nation state's assets and potentially use it as a hedge against inflation. Now, this approach could reshape monetary policy and indeed influence other countries to manage their own reserves in a similar sort of fashion. So you can see, just by making this statement, if he does make it, it may have that ripple effect onto the other national treasuries, why they shouldn't be doing the same, right? Incorporating some Bitcoins. I'm not talking about massive upon massive amounts, but at least contemplating to hold some of the Bitcoins into the national reserves. Why not? So if this happens, and it looks said that he will make a mention about this, well, it's going to set alarms ringing, and the bull will certainly be felt in the midterm. So let's watch out for that, because I think that's going to be the major highlight of this conference. Also, I'd like to make a mention that there's been some sell-offs on the Bitcoin. So you've got Mt. Gox, the Japanese exchange, repayments is currently happening, and that's drying up. Also, we've got the German state Bitcoin seized assets. Also, it's already dried up, because I haven't seen any significant sell-offs from the German state wallets, Bitcoin wallets. So it's drying up. And interestingly, I've been looking at some of the statistics in terms of the Bitcoin spot ETS performance, in terms of net flows. Well, last Friday was the 10th consecutive day of positive net inflows into Bitcoins. Now, this actually means there hasn't been any sell-offs at all from any of the ETFs, which is significant, right? Now, this is actually a confirmed signal that the bull run is set to continue, and it's going to be explosive. So, again, another sign that's set to continue to rally, and it's going to be explosive. Certainly, it's in the second half of this year. Right. Another point to make is there is obviously this impending interest rate cuts that are looming in some of the advanced economies like the United States, where, given the positive CPI June report release indicating that there is a slight decrement of the rate of inflation. So it's going to really add pressure to Powell to bring forward the interest rate cuts, but it's going to be in September most likely. Also, the ECB, they've actually maintained, I think, this month to hold on to the first cut in the previous months. But if the US is going to set the interest rate cuts in September, then ECB is going to follow suit. The UK also have plans to actually make, I think, a couple of 25 basis points interest rate cuts towards the end of the year. So with all of this, again, this is going to provide an appetite for holders, investors, whether it's institutional or retail investors, to heavily invest into Bitcoin assets, because as soon as you have an interest rate cut, and it's going to be quite often, well, it's going to set the ground running on Bitcoin appreciation. So that's really, really positive. And let's put the case, if Donald Trump does become elected, well, it's very clear that we may possibly see some more frequent and perhaps larger interest rate cuts because, he's a business magnate. That's his bread and butter, that's his heritage. And he wants to help businesses and investors as much as possible, which is in stark contrast to the Biden administration today. And the last point I want to make is to do with this Japanese company called Metaplanet. Now, they've actually adopted Bitcoin, so they've adopted Bitcoin standard where they've actually incorporated a handful of their Bitcoins into their corporate treasuries. And it's not funny enough, it's really not surprising at all. I've seen that the Metaplanet stock performance is overwhelmingly beating the index, the Japanese index, over the past several days and weeks. Just a reminder, Metaplanet have adopted the Bitcoin standard since April 2024 this year. And if you look at the performances, it's explosive. And yet again, following the example of what Michael Saylor and his MicroStrategy team have done, adopting Bitcoin standard, this is just an overwhelming evidence that this is the right thing to do, right? To incorporate a sufficient amount of your corporate treasury into Bitcoin, because it's the best performing asset and will continue to be the best performing assets in the months and years to come, particularly once the 21 million Bitcoin has been sold off and the scarcity effect will be made known. Well, that's going to set off even further the appreciation onto the Bitcoin price overwhelmingly. So the price of the Bitcoin in the past week has been overwhelmingly positive. At the time of this recording, which is Monday 22nd of July, it's hovering around $67,000 per coin. So we've seen a steep recovery for the reason I just mentioned earlier on. So the message here is, let's watch out for what President Trump says in this conference, besides the other guest speakers I've mentioned at the Bitcoin Nashville conference later on this week. Continue to remain calm, convicted and committed into dollar cost average, yen cost average, euro cost average, pound cost average, as much as you can, as you're able to, into Bitcoin, because it's going to be explosive. It's going to be a hot summer. So this is the message. Let's continue with our own conviction, because we know that investing in Bitcoin is the only way, let's be honest, the only way to guarantee that intergenerational wealth, gold, that we always have at the forefront of our minds. So let's continue to hold on to Bitcoin. And if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. And if you haven't done so, please subscribe to my Crypto Stock Corner channel, as I regularly post some high quality videos that could be of interest to you investors out there. So until next time.